Hello and welcome back to the Spirit Podcast. Today's guest is Travis Sanders, who is a renowned clairvoyant medium. I was reading online. Do you still describe yourself as clairvoyant?
Um, to be honest with you, I just say medium or like before it made more sense because I am incredibly visual in how I perceive information. Um, but I guess in some ways that doesn't help with some of the misunderstandings around the conflations of the terminology that a lot of people use. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'll take it.
Okay, cool. And we'll get to that because I was going to ask more specifically for you to describe that. But let me finish with introducing you. So you live and work in Ohio, is that correct?
Yep.
And you are currently offering in-person readings,
Yes.
and Travis has also written a few books at this point, and we'll get into that a little bit too, because especially one of your books, it's such a fabulous guide to mediumship, and it's something I wish I had when I was early in development because it just really lays things out in a really practical manner. So we'll get into that, but welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for asking me.
Yes. Okay. So we sort of started talking about clairvoyant mediumship. Can you describe what that is to you, to our listeners, like how maybe you perceive what you get from the spirit world?
Yeah, so when I read for someone, I primarily get my information in the form of feelings and pictures. That's always been the senses that have dominated in my readings. Um, and I guess I never really thought too much about it. I think at the time, I really resonated with that terminology because, as I said, I am very visual. And I think sometimes too, like in our Western society, we see psychic medium a lot. And in some way, like I get it. But in other ways, I feel like it's almost redundant because if you're a medium, you're also psychic. So you're just kind of repeating yourself, I think. So I think I probably went with that moniker just to illustrate because there are some people who will strictly work with spirit communication and they don't want to get into the psychic work. And I find that my work is very 50-50 and I
Mm.
enjoy both for different reasons. And sometimes one seems to dominate and be stronger than the other and it goes through phases. So that's probably why I went with that and I just left it after I created my
Yeah.
website.
Well, I loved seeing it because I also am very visual, and to where some sessions are more like charades than others, but sometimes spirit will just be like, give her what she knows. Come on, get like it feels like charades. And so not always, but being very visual, I also forget, especially in teaching this work, that not everybody is. Like some people are very not visual. And so I have to sort of change my descriptions and terminology when I'm like, doing guided meditations for students or something, because it really is different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes for people who are visual, it's almost hard to comprehend what it's like to not be visual.
Yes.
So sometimes too, like you had mentioned guided practices. And so sometimes in classes, I'll say, perceive or conceive in whatever way that you do, because maybe the idea of a picture instead of a picture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. What other questions do I have for you today? Oh, one of my favorite things about you is how well versed you are when it comes to the spiritualist philosophy, or I don't know if that's the right word, but I have learned a lot from you listening to your podcast and reading your books and feeling like I understand the spiritualist perspective more. And I also adore how much you have modernized it, whether you realize it or not, because you're really like bringing it and pulling it from the past into the future, and it's still so applicable. So, so also I just have to touch on, I think you turned me on to Red Cloud Speaks was the first time I heard about it, and it's like my favorite book, like ever. And so, yeah.
Oh,
What'd you say?
it's a tome. It's so thick.
Yes.
Uh, but yeah, no, of with the history and a lot of the pioneers, there's several that I really love, but Estelle Roberts is probably one of my favorites. Um, And probably because she was so talented in both mental, physical, trance, really displaying all the gifts of the spirit. And when that book came across my path, and maybe it was partly to my like traditional religious upbringing,
Yeah.
I was like, I vibe with this. So I've read that book probably 3 or 4 times, cover to cover, and I always get something different out of it every time that I do.
Yes. Um, can you, I know it's so rich and there's so much, but can you sort of describe maybe your favorite part of the philosophy or what stood out to you just to share with our listeners?
Yeah, one of the things that I really enjoy, and it's one of sort of a project that I'm currently working on. I'm going to do a class next month on it, but I think a lot of times today we don't put as much emphasis on natural law. And that
Mm,
was really big in the height of the spiritualist movement. And so we have, because of like new age teachings like law of attraction, Abraham Hicks, The Secret, people are familiar with law of attraction, but there's many universal laws.
mhm.
The biggest one probably being cause and effect. And I think people are like, yeah, there's a cause and an effect, but there's so much nuance to it when you really get deep with it, and it sort of dovetails with all of these other laws. So I love the aspect of that that really touches on natural law and how mediumship operates within natural law. So I really like that, but there's just so much. I don't know. I find that the trance aspect very interesting, and that no matter how sort of pure a mediumistic connection can be, there's always an element of the medium. But when you see some people who are really proficient in it, the way that pretty much any question given to them can have some sort of fluent, uh, thoughtful, not just a generic sort of cliche sort of response. There's just something about that to me that is, I don't know, it nurtures me. It feeds my spirit in a way that I really love.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And when you speak to natural law, can you expand on that a little bit? Like how that applies to the mediumship, or can you kind of try to describe it? I know it's also a bigger thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I tend to find that within mediumship, even though there are many different laws and different people will sort of classify them in different ways, the main ones that operate within mediumship are really vibration and attraction. And we can see different examples of that. So, like within the context of a sitting, um, we know working with discarnate consciousness, working with souls, that's a different vibrational rate. So, in learning to train our awareness and be still and touch the spirit within, we're sort of altering that vibration to connect with higher vibrations. And when those are in that uh, like vibrating, or there's a synastry, that's where that communication takes place. One of the biggest examples with attraction or affinity or association, or whatever terminology you want to use there, is when people talk about spirit guides and psychic protection. So inevitably, and I know that you teach and do workshops, someone is always going to ask, well, what about like not good spirits? I've been told that I need to put a bubble around myself, or that I need a gatekeeper, or that sort of thing. And I personally feel like it would be intellectually dishonest to say there aren't negative people who have died. Therefore, there's probably negative spirits. And I do believe that most people, because we have a broader perspective, change and see things from that broader perspective. But I'm not one of these mediums who think that you're instantly pure love and light the minute you cross over. We still have to work with that stuff. We still have to progress, and we have that free will of how willing we are to look at ourselves. But I also feel like too, that affinity, or that like energy of love, is what enables the communication. So you don't have to worry about like Jeffrey Dahmer popping through, because you have no relation, you have no vibrational affinity there.
Yeah.
And if you're working from that place of I'm being of service
Mhm.
and healing,
Yeah.
those are the types of spirit consciousnesses that are allowed to come through with that vibration.
Well said. Thank you so much. And have you had an experience in a reading where I don't know. I'm just going to use the example of your sitter was potentially abused by somebody in the spirit world.
Oh yeah.
And so have you had that experience where the spirit you're perceiving somebody like a, maybe a or had done bad things in their life from a different place? Or what's your perception of how that can kind of come through to you?
It's funny. I always know when a soul has something that they're sort of wanting to take ownership of or apologize for, because when I start to become aware of them in my space, it's almost like they're at the periphery. They're
Mm,
at the edge of the room. And it's almost like a slow moving forward. And that to me just kind of symbolizes that there's like an element of like, I'm not sure how I'm going to be received here. And a lot of times it is taking responsibility. I know that I was this way, or I know that I was controlling, or I know that I hurt this person. And sometimes the sitter's open to receiving it, which is wonderful when that happens. And I've also had people be like, nah, hang up the line, like get someone else on the phone. I'm not interested.
mhm.
And I always want people to be open to just hearing them out, but I can't force that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience. They're always right at the edge where the wall is,
Yeah.
literally of the room. And I've even perceived them, sometimes they'll look almost like they're in prison. And I
Mm,
almost think in the way that we experience a prison of our own making at times here on earth, why can't there be something similar
absolutely.
in on the other side? Who knows? But I've seen at least the visual almost communicated for the sitter, for whatever, like, for them to interpret in the way that we can interpret visuals and things like that. I don't know. It's really interesting. So let's see. Oh, I love following you on social media. I feel like I always say this. So if you're listening to this and you don't already follow him, go follow him. You post so much great stuff and you're funny, which is so important in these times. Like we need a laugh. And I love again the depth and richness that you share about mediumship from what I interpret as a spiritualist perspective. Maybe that's you have your own perspective, but it's just you have a lot of spiritualists or a lot of knowledge on spiritualism because to me, it's so grounded and it's so matter of fact and it feels so safe and so, I don't know, the way you talk about the spirit world comes across in such a way that I crave and I'm sure other people do because nowadays I don't know if it's like pop culture or TikTok or um, even people I meet out in the world that interpret the work we do or interpret the spirit world as something different than I do in a way. Do you know what I mean? So I wonder what your thoughts would be on how this work has evolved, especially in America, because that's where we are, and what you might speak to that mediumship could use moving forward? Or do you know what I mean? Kind of to get back on track. I know there are a lot of great mediums out there, but I also feel like there's so many mediums popping up and we could use some wisdom. So do you mind speaking to that or what advice you might have for the movement?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. In some
Mhm.
ways, it's fantastic to see so many people engaging with the spirit world and touching into their own talents and capabilities. And on the other side, because everything is so instantaneous in our society, it's like, they take a class or anybody with a deck of tarot cards, they're like, oh, I'm also a medium. And then they start going out and you see, I'm not big, huge, I should say. I am a little bit into structures and regulation and there are some things that I would say are correct and incorrect. But as a whole, I think that there's room for flexibility because mediumship needs to evolve because the needs of the world aren't the same as they were 20 in the time period that I would have loved to have lived in, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago. Um, so I think one thing is I would really encourage people just to go so slow. Looking at my own journey, if I could do it all over again, in some ways because I love where I'm at and who I am as a person. I wouldn't change anything, but at the same time, if I'm looking specifically at the mediumistic aspect of it, I would have gone about my development much differently. And maybe it was the fact that that TV show came along so young and just sort of set things into motion. And I'm just like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. But I would much rather see people take longer and develop a richness and develop a quality than just, oh, I can do this, therefore I will. Um, and I do see, what one of the things that I think bothers me more than anything else is not so much how people are approaching mediumship, um, but it's a lot of the misinformation that's spread about the spirit world itself.
Mm,
And it's not to say that we know or that one particular source knows exactly what it's like, because I even tell people in my sessions, if they give me some sort of visual or impression, I'm like, I don't know if they're literally doing this over there, but they're doing this to say, like, to demonstrate something about themselves. I don't know that they're literally fishing on the other side, although maybe they are. I don't know that they're literally in a casino on the other side, but who knows? Maybe they are. But there is a lot of fear-based stuff. And you get that a lot too with the paranormal stuff, which has just never been my jam. And then you have the complete opposite direction where it's like everyone's a formless light that's all one consciousness. And it's like, my impression, and this is just me, I don't necessarily think that the spirit world is all that different than here. I'm sure it's much more refined. We don't have those barriers like language and stuff like that, but I think it's probably pretty darn similar, at least in the early stages of being over there.
yeah, I think I sort of got that from Red Cloud's reading, like the way, and I thought, oh, that's great. And also, wow, it's not so
Right?
different. Yeah. I know. Um, so how would you encourage people to develop slowly and richly on their own, I'm assuming? Would that be just them sitting with spirit one on one? How would you encourage people to do that?
One-on-one, or like sitting by themselves, I think you can go a decent amount of the trek on your own. You can forge that connection with your own spirit. You can forge that connection with your guides, your helpers. Um, Although at some point, I do think you need other people. And classes and workshops are fantastic if they're available to you. But even if you just have one or two other people, if you just come together to sit on a regular basis, I think that's probably going to do more for your mediumship in the long run than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I also um, appreciated what you were saying there too about some of the misinformation because it is a pet peeve of mine when people speak so matter of like they know what happens when we die. They know exactly how the spirit world works, and then it's like red flag, you know. But people do. People speak about it very confidently, and that always blows my mind.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised.
Yeah.
Be surprised.
Yes. Um, okay, let's see. So I know I heard you at least speak to the fact that you enjoyed hands-on healing,
Yeah,
and I'd love to hear more about that from you and how what that's like, how it's different from mediumship. Is it more like trance? I'd love you to just explain what you can.
sure. So, like a lot of people, when I was a teenager, I started with Reiki, and I think many people can probably trace any that do all sorts of types of healing back to Reiki at some point. Um, and I think in general, with any form of energy work, over time, it kind of becomes your own style, your own flavor. Um, but back in 2012, when I sort of really started to focus more on the mediumship, um, I would notice that very similarly to when I would sit for spirit and I would recognize certain calling cards of what I believe to be a guy or a helper who works with me, that would start to happen in the healing room. So I would really just focus on blending with that personality. Um, and it was different. The energy felt different. I think the mechanics, the concept is still the same behind it, but I think instead of, focusing on, oh, I need to put my hands on this chakra or this body part, or I need to draw this symbol or whatever. It was more like, I'm just going to get myself out of the way.
Mhm.
Once I feel that connection, I don't have to move my hands. I can stay put. You don't even need to be touching that person. I'm in their energy. Now I'm recognizing the energy of spirit, and I'm just going to try to remove myself as much as I can from the equation. And sometimes are certain, and I think it depends person to person who's receiving it, but there are some times where I'm very aware of what's taking place. And there are other times where it's like, I just sort of feel like I go somewhere else for a while, or my thoughts stop for a while. Um, but I've noticed differences in temperature. I've noticed differences in people crying or seeming to touch more the, I guess, the emotional body more so than the physical body. But every session is different and I love it. And the other thing that I like about it is, unlike with an evidential sitting, you're very much an active participant. You're sort of being the bridge, the conductor for this communication that's taking place. And in healing, you just get to turn your brain off and just hold space. And um, I feel like you also get a little bit of a high from it too. You get a bit of that healing energy. It's like
Mhm.
whether you're sitting in circle or sitting for trance or doing meditation, you come out of it and you have that upliftment. And I always feel that after healing work too.
Mm, I love that. Do you find that it also takes the same amount of, I don't know, energy as a mediumship reading? Because I know in the past we've spoken about how mediumship requires a certain amount of energy, and we have to be mindful of that and how much we can work as mediums. Is it similar or is it different? Or maybe it's not too noticeable?
For me, I feel like it's different. I think I could probably do session after session after session and not feel tired.
Oh, cool.
As to where if I did three half-hour, 40-minute sessions, I'd be like, I'm done for the day.
Yeah. So speaking to that, what is your favorite way to take care of yourself so that you can be the good medium that you are, or the great medium that you are, rather? Do you have favorite ways to self-care, or have you found a good balance? I'd love to hear any wisdom you have to share on that.
I'm much better, I think, than I was even just a few years ago. Um, Solitude is always a big thing for me, even as a kid. And I think for a long time I fell into the trap of only doing that. It was like I need to, close myself off and just decompress. And I do think that that's important. But the past couple of years, it's been more nature oriented, spending a lot of time outside, a lot of time moving the body, just walking, stretching, yoga, whatever it might be. Um, I'm always big on a bubble bath. To me, there's nothing that like is a reset like a bubble bath. But yeah, nature has been really therapeutic as far as keeping myself balanced and recharging myself.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like just following you on social media, I was gonna say, I bet it has something to do with nature because you always post such beautiful pictures out on walks with, I don't know if they're your dogs, but I always see your little dogs on social media. Um, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that kind of brings me to my next question of how much the world has sort of changed since COVID, and maybe it was changing before. What have you noticed in your connection with the spirit world with these kind of changing times? Or have you noticed a consistent difference in your readings? I don't know, just anything that comes up.
That's a really good question. Um, as far as how it feels, I don't know that I felt much of a difference. I will say the types of souls, or the souls of the types of passings, have changed a bit.
Mm.
So for some reason, I tend to get a lot of overdoses. Maybe it's just the area that I live in, the crises that we have in this country. But one thing that I was very surprised by is how quickly I started getting like COVID passings. Um, and then you kind of, you get used to the way, especially if you're very feeling oriented, like um, certain bodily illnesses or certain physical impressions you feel can relate to the way someone passed as part of identifying who you're talking to. And I don't know, I guess I wasn't expecting in the midst of the pandemic to having so many people come through that quickly. That kind of surprised me. Um, there was, oh, the other thing too, I was having a conversation with my partner the other day, and this kind of speaks to some of the social aspects of things. And can even kind of tie this into natural law a little bit with like the law of gender. So in natural law, everything has gender, not in the sense of physical sex, but if you think of yin and yang, masculine, feminine, projective, receptive, electrical, magnetic, we have these dualities, these polarities within us. And every male has a certain degree of male energy and female energy and the same thing. But now that we're in a world where so many people identify with like non-binary or genderqueer, I was having the conversation of like, I wonder what it's going to be like for mediums in the future when you're like, I have a person here.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to have to work a little bit harder with our evidence to establish who we're talking to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Not male or female so much as yeah. Um, yeah, that will be interesting. And the type of music that will be coming through. Because right now, right, we get like Sinatra and we're getting like all these older, and then we're gonna be bring through like Bone Thugs and Harmony or something.
The spirit here is saying it's Britney, but does that mean anything to you?
I know. I love that. That's good. Um, and I guess I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but you were on the show Psychic Kids and you were 17. And I just think that's so cool, especially having an 18-year-old and an almost 16-year-old. And they're very much their own person and also have had their own experiences with spirit. And I think maybe for comfort, one of my kids who was really open kind of shut it down because it was like a lot to be perceiving and trying to figure out and navigate. How was that for you being so young? I almost have to use the word brave, kind of stepping forward at such a young age and identifying and doing this work. How has that shaped, who you are at the age you are now?
I'm very blessed in that big picture. I don't know that I struggled in the way that a lot of kids do. I know that I've spoken in the past, different different outlets about how I grew up Pentecostal, and so a lot of people, especially like kids with fundamental upbringings, that's like a huge, that would be a huge barrier for them. And my parents were, they didn't quite understand for a long time, but they were at least accepting, because they knew that something was different with this kid.
Mhm.
But I do think there was always, even if I didn't quite understand it myself, there was always just this conviction that I had of, I have to do this. I can't explain it other than I have to. It's why I'm here. It's in me, and if I don't do this, I feel like I'm going to explode, kind of a thing. So, in a lot of ways, it did shape my life because other kids were like planning their college courses, and I'm like in school at the guidance counselor, like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk to the dead people, or it's like, of course, I'm sure they thought I was crazy, but it really set up the trajectory for where I am, and I don't know that I knew where it was going or how it would end up, but so far it's been all right.
And that's so cool to feel that calling so young because I definitely can relate to that calling. But for me, it happened much later in life in my 30s.
Okay.
So how cool that you're this young one and you're like, okay, I got it. That's that old soul for sure.
It's so funny because for years and years and years, I was always the youngest person of like, when I started working psychic fairs or anytime I would be in a class or whatever, I was always like the baby. And now in today, kind of going back to how things have changed so much, there's a lot of young people really stepping out. So that's kind of
Yeah, that is cool. But you were one of the trailblazers, so we got to give it to you and thank you. Yeah. So let's see. Oh, what else was I was just about to ask you something. Oh, well, one of the things that I do like to ask everybody who's in this field and in mediumship, if you could try to describe what you have learned about what the other side is like or your perception of what it is like for our listeners, just because I feel like that's always a big question for people. You know, what happens when we die? What is it like? And I know there are so many unknowns, but I also imagine Spirit has showed you quite a bit in all the years of doing this work. So, what can you share about how you perceive things to be on the other side?
That's a really good question. I feel, based off of a lot of my sessions, kind of like we talked about a little bit ago, I do think that, at least in the early stages, the way things appear probably are very similar to here. Um, and perhaps as we grow and change and evolve on that side, our environment probably reflects that interchange. But I do think that our experience is very much dictated by where we're at, our personal growth, what we have put out in the world, that sort of thing. Um, I do think I don't know, quite understand. People talk about levels, which sometimes makes it sound like a video game, but I do think that there are different spaces, different people, because I'll have different generations come through, or people who maybe were connected in different ways in life, and they'll talk about having connected but are in different spaces. I don't know how to articulate it other than that. Um, but yeah, I think it's funny for someone who's very visual. I don't know that I've necessarily seen a lot of visual aspects of the other side. Um, I have had a lot of souls show me things that are very beautiful pictures of nature. And I think that's probably as close to what I could comprehend, but I'm sure it's much more than I could ever comprehend now.
What did Sylvia Brown say, but like minus the bugs?
Yeah, yeah.
And I always think of that when I am out in nature. I'm like, one day there won't be all these bugs. Anyway, um, yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. And I think it's also cool that your love of nature also Spirit is using that to kind of translate the beautiful aspects. I've also heard that when I've brought through, like my husband's a musician, my dad's a musician. So some of the people that I've especially brought through for my husband, um, I keep hearing, and this echoes through other sessions with clients, I keep hearing how good the sound quality is in the spirit world from their person. So it's like this, like they're their best friend or their bro, and they're like, the sound, like it's a sound guy, in spirit. And they're like, the sound quality is amazing. And I just think it's so sweet how much it resembles their life here on earth, and they're still excited about the same things, and it's just like elevated some of the experiences. So
And something too, you talking about the music reminded me. I did have a session not long ago where the communicator was expressing how he was learning the violin on the spirit side, which was, I guess, an interest that he had when he was here, but he never acted on it. So I guess we can, like, I don't know how you learn on
yeah,
if classes or mentors or whatever, but I guess we always keep learning.
I had maybe this is TMI to divulge in a podcast episode because it feels so intimate, but one of my dear friends passed away, and we both shared a massive love of the Beatles. I mean, like kind of both of us like obsessively, and we would play Beatles trivia games, and like just it was our love, our shared love. And when George Harrison, I can't remember the timeline exactly, but obviously George Harrison is not here. And my friend came through, which I'm sure you feel this way. It very rarely happens that so intimately one of my loved ones, I'll have an experience like that, where it's like a session, but it's just us, like it's not through another medium. And he started to explain how, oh, because I think it was George Harrison's like birthday or it was some anniversary. And he showed me and told me that he was putting on the best concert and just gave me this like glimpse of what it was like and kind of joked like that's all I can't tell you anymore because I do feel like there's some sort of joke of like we can't tell them all the secrets, we have like we have to kind of keep this barrier. as like law. But he showed me this glimpse and it was the most psychedelic in color, the most like immersive, like you're on drugs experiencing this amazing music. And I just thought, how cool. Like that was just a tiny little drop of a perception of what it might be like to experience a concert, in the spirit world.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway. Um, all right, let's see. Oh, I was really excited to ask you this. Um, I wondered if your perception of God has changed since doing this work, and how has it changed? If that feels very personal to ask, but if you don't mind sharing.
Long.
Okay.
Um, in some ways, I think it has. So even though I grew up in the fundamental religion that I did, I always struggled with understanding God as a personal being.
Mhm.
And so in my teen years, when I was introduced to spiritualism, their understanding or explanation of God as an impersonal force made much more sense to me. Um, and I've stuck with that for a long time, and I still very much feel that way. The way that I interact, I think, is the part that has evolved. Um, so like a lot of people are into meditation. Not a lot of people talk about prayer. Prayer is very big for me, but prayer has sort of evolved from asking because I need this fixed and this fixed and this fixed to just touching that place within me where that divine spark exists, and knowing that I'm held within that God force or spirit or great spirit, whatever you want to call it, and just communing, just being with it, and knowing that within touching that, certain things are sort of set into motion or energies are being directed in the way that they are. Um, but it was, I think, Gordon Higginson who originally said it, and it made a lot of sense to me, which is being that God doesn't have physical hands and fingers, that when we pray and we attune to that divine force, in doing that, aside from asking, we also need to contemplate, like, what can I do for you? Because instead of praying for like a being to do something for you, we attune to that to figure out how to do it for ourselves. Or
Mm.
maybe we're inspired to do something in that moment that we don't know why, but we were used to be the answer for someone else's prayer. So we have to, that's like, you know, evangelicals are itching for the apocalypse and they want that heaven on earth, but we make heaven on earth when we are attuned to that divine source and allow it to influence us and how we act and walk in this world.
I love the way that you described that because it kind of takes the work element out of acts of service or feeling like we have to do this for a reward. And it's more, yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah, that's really beautiful. It kind of like, it makes so much more sense as to what we're really here for and that kind of relationship. So I'm so glad you talked about that and mentioned that. Um, let's see. I guess that's most of the questions, like the crux of the questions that I wanted to ask you. I also was thinking about another question while you were talking, and by the way, I had to find a copy of that book On the Side of Angels, the Gordon Higginson story, because you did a podcast episode where you read a portion of the book, and I was like so inspired. So thank you for sharing that because it really inspired me. And now I recommend that book too to people I know because I just think it's so great. In like, it's really interesting. So when I did dive into spiritualism from on my own. Um, Learning about the Fox sisters, that it was really in the United States in what was it like the late 1800s, early 1900s? You tell me, I can't remember.
1848.
Okay. So it really started in the US, but then somehow it really caught on in England. And Because we can't find spiritualist churches here, hardly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very hard.
Yeah.
Uh, and several of my friends are mediums and spiritualists in the UK, and they're like, you could throw a stone in any direction and hit a
I
spiritualist church over
know.
there. It's wild.
It's really cool. But it's so interesting that it did start here. And then I think, I don't know, I guess I have a little bit of a weird perception of American mediums because it just seems like there's much more rich history and practical application when it comes to the English ways of approaching it. And then here, I mean, I grew up watching Sylvia Brown, and that was kind of like my holy grail of like psychics in the US. So what might you speak to about that? I mean, and let me just say, I feel like I keep praising you in this episode, but it's so I'm so grateful that you speak the way you do, and you kind of are bridging this, like you're bringing it back into the United States with this approach in the way that you speak about it. So I just wonder what you might have to say about how American mediumship might be evolving in a positive way, bringing some of the richness of the history. I don't know if you notice any of that. I feel like it's almost like, here's how I would describe it. It's like our soil. It's not really rich in minerals. And like we're like needed to go back to like, more rural places in the world that have really rich soil so we can get all those nutrients. I kind of feel that way about mediumship in the US. And saying that, I feel bad because we also have a lot of great mediums, but I think there is an overwhelming lack of nutrients, if that makes sense. What would you kind of say to people who are developing, and especially people who are teaching? Would you have any advice to kind of, yeah, enrich?
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
One thing that has been really kind of inspiring is, and I think it's been even more so since everything has been very Zoom oriented from the pandemic, which is I have noticed there seems to be a lot more spiritualists and mediums from the UK in America, whether it's via Zoom classes, or I even was looking through the Lilydale catalog the other day and I noticed that Penny Hayward and I think it's Richard Stuttle are going to be there. So there is kind of like a bit of a British invasion
Yeah.
that's kind of going on. Um, and there's with every style, there's pros and cons and good elements and maybe not so good elements. But I do love the English style, and if I look at it as a whole, I think as far as evidential goes, they had some of the best demonstrators,
Yeah.
historically. Um, but I also think too, even just looking at other cultural aspects of things, like a spiritismo, Afro-Cuban form of spiritism, looking at traditional like French Kardecian spiritism and our sort of spiritualist cousin, and just there are elements that we can draw from, and there's much more similarities than there are differences. And I think if we can at least find those core threads or those core concepts that can really sort of nurture the soil, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I'm
A-
hopeful.
And I know what you mean. I mean, I think for centuries there's been medicine people in tribes and communities that are doing this work, and there's been a richness here, but I guess it's just not as normalized or mainstream as I feel like it is in England. So that's the part that I hope can keep coming in, is the um mm, some of the ancient wisdom. Because I
Yeah.
think, yeah, because I think sometimes it can get watered down or lost when when the ego and maybe some of the Hollywood stuff coming in, I think it just changes it a little, you know? And maybe that's my interpretation of the American, it's like fast food mediumship a little bit. Not always, but there's some of that. Yeah.
Well, it's like before, um, before you had your mediums, you had the prophets of old, and before the
Mm.
prophets of old, you had, like you said, the indigenous people. They always had a medicine person, a shaman, you know, um, and that was the root. That's the tap root, and like evidential is great and there's always a need for it and we always should be evidential, but um, Tony Stockwell, who I love his work.
Mhm.
I know he's gotten a lot of flack from people who are like very hardcore traditionalist English spiritualists because he is sort of saying, okay, as the world is changing and evolving, how can we look at this from other perspectives? So I know he's done classes that he's called like shamanic mediumship. He's done some
And
classes.
I took that class. It's yes, it was like a multiple. It was for a while, and it was amazing. And what was so cool about that class is I have practiced those specific type of readings, and there's no box or evidence for spirit to be in, and yet it is a journey that the person receiving it feels. It's like infused with something different. And I think that's so brave of Tony to get empower people to break out of that shell because there is so much wisdom there. And I think it can bring up like past life trauma. And so sorry, I just had to like add to, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, you know, in the exploring, even if it's not a direction that we go in, there's elements that say, okay, we can work things differently and it doesn't make it bad or any less because it's not the traditional way.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think he even had a class on like
Star
off.
people,
Yes. You knew where I was going with that. Um, yeah.
which is, I'm sure that there absolutely are things like, I don't know that that's for me, but it's interesting.
Because there is some stuff about, the pyramids and ancient Egypt that would be cool to explore. Sometimes, like, I really am like, okay, I do this work. I need to know about, the pyramids and ancient Egypt. I want to know more. So anyway, so much to explore. Um, so my next question is a little controversial of a topic these days. There's been brought into question some scamming and some fraud with physical mediumship, and I wonder what your take is on that. Have you been following this? I think it's a big hot topic right now in the community. Okay.
Yeah. Um, it's very disheartening and it's also frustrating because I do believe that physical mediumship does exist. And I don't think it's as prevalent as it was even 40, 50 years ago. But there were genuine people and there are genuine phenomena that can occur. And when you have people who are just blatant frauds, I think people tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so I would encourage people to explore. But if you also look back historically at some of the most phenomenal physical mediums, it wasn't something that they were doing for a ticket. You know, it wasn't something that they were trying to make a career off of. These were often private circles, home circles. Sometimes, if there was a fee, it was very minimal. And so I think we always have to take people's motivation into account. Anybody who always claims that they can replicate phenomena with any sort of consistency, I always think is a little suspect. But I
Mhm.
also think like common sense stuff, some of the people who have been very controversial, it's like it doesn't even look like good fraud. So the fact that some of these personalities have such a grip, such an, have people so enthralled just kind of boggles my mind a little bit.
Yeah. I know. Why do you think that is? I mean, I guess like anything that's like cultish, it still happens nowadays that people are
It's
taken advantage
exactly
of.
that. I think it's exactly that. It's a cult mentality. Um, some of these people, and you and I both know people who know these people. Um, it's the way that they manipulate people. And someone said to me one time, I was visiting Camp Chesterfield. I think it was the very first time I was ever there. And I befriended a young guy who was around my age who worked on the grounds as kind of a groundskeeper. But he grew up sort of in that environment. And he told me, he's like, people would rather be entertained than have a genuine spiritual experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is some capitalism on the entertainment aspect. And then I think other times people are just so desperate to want to believe in almost magic. Because really, a lot of the stuff that they're doing are like fancy magic tricks, whether it's puking up gems or
Mm.
in all the things that you see.
Yeah.
It's very much like stage magic.
And it's so unfortunate that that does discredit some people in history that, yeah. And so do you feel like, because I even feel like when I was looking up the birth of spiritualism, with the Fox sisters, from what I understand, that was kind of if you had to go back and put a timeline. Um, People were even questioning if that was real back then. And like still, when you Google it, it's like allegedly, supposedly, and there was a lot of fraud and scam, um, insinuation
Yeah.
online, and it's like, wow.
And it's one of those things where I don't remember who said this quote, but someone has said something that along the lines of, for those who believe, no proof is needed. For those who don't, no proof will ever be enough. And I think that's always kind of going to be the case with physical phenomena. Um, I was lucky enough to sit with a group 2 or 3 times, and this has been probably close to 10 years ago now. Um, where I believe I experienced genuine physical phenomena. And these were people who, if you didn't have sort of a connection there, they weren't out there, they weren't advertising that there was physical mediumship. It was a very private, small home circle. And so I think that that is probably where people are going to have the better luck at experiencing something that is more genuine versus these advertised promotional seances.
And, I appreciate you saying that because we don't always know something is real unless we've experienced it firsthand. So just encouraging people to, you know, have their own experiences. But and as soon as I say that, my next thought is like, well, since there is so much fraud, how do people kind of safeguard themselves from falling victim to some of the negative, some of the fraud out there?
Yeah, it's hard.
Mhm.
And one of the hardest things is the darkness factor.
Mhm.
So, like, even though I believe in the 3 or 4 sittings that I had with this group that genuine phenomena occurred, I would be lying if I said that there weren't moments after the fact where maybe that wasn't, maybe there was, maybe how could that have happened? Was there a way where you start questioning things? Um, and that's why I feel like, so in the old days, most physical phenomena occurred ectoplasmically. um, but for those who might know the skull experiments that took place in the 90s, that I believe the spirit side has been working at finding new ways of producing phenomena that are less dangerous, that do not rely on ectoplasm and therefore do not need darkness.
Mhm.
And so if we can sort of work with the spirit side to move, for those who have that talent, that capability to move physical mediumship into a position where it can sustain more light, then maybe we could gain some more credibility in those instances.
I love that. That's like anything, bringing it to the light is going to help so much. So literally and figuratively. Yeah. I love that. Um, I wanted to talk about, well, actually, I have a question first. Am I correct in thinking you're writing another book?
Yeah, it's pretty much done.
Oh, cool. Congratulations. What's this book about?
So this book might offend some people, but it's okay. Um, I'm still even working on the title, and usually I'll start with the title and then work around that. But it's really about how we work with our own energy systems within our body.
Mm.
Um, I was contemplating titling it "So You're an Empath, Knock It Off." Um, it's really just for people who feel like they're a victim of their own sensitivity,
Mhm.
because you don't have to be.
Yeah.
Just learning about the etheric body, how to strengthen it, ways to, we talk about like psychic protection. How do you work with your own auric field, your own natural spiritual immune system?
Mhm.
So you're working with your sensitivity instead of feeling like a victim of it.
That's wonderful. I feel like we need that more than ever. Because one of the things that I have noticed in readings in the last like few years is that feels different is I almost feel like there's this overlay. And at this point, it might be collective. I'm not sure if I'm perceiving it the right way, but there's almost like a blanket of anxiety over the planet.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's us, feeding into it or if it's just I don't know how it's I don't know what's going on, but I've perceived it that way. So I think more than ever people do need these like very specific and direct tools to help themselves.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I don't, it is interesting. It does seem to be sort of a mass thing.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I'm sure there's probably multiple factors that
Yeah.
all contribute to it. But yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of my people as well.
So you wrote
Anxiety.
a book.
I wrote about yeah.
I love it. When is that going to be coming out?
Oh, it honestly depends on how motivated I
Okay, yeah.
am.
Ish. 2026-ish maybe?
Oh, I would be surprised if it takes longer than the end of the year.
Oh, good. That's exciting.
If I had to guess, I would probably say around fall.
Cool. Well, it just sounds like it's just what the doctor ordered for so many people because I do think um a couple things. I'm thinking of that word comes to mind. Who are the people who wrote the book about the Indigo children? And that was even like maybe just below maybe that's your generation. So, and then I think that there's even more sensitive kids coming in. Um, and especially having kids myself and teenagers, and not only like the maybe psychic or spiritual sensitivities that they just naturally have, there's this human stressors of like financially supporting themselves after they graduate high school, the cost of everything, the climate of the world, like literally the climate and the political landscape. I mean, there's so much that they're dealing with, that I think it's so cool that you are bringing this information in right now in a practical way.
Oh,
So,
I hope it reaches where it needs to go and who it needs to connect with. Um, it's hard sometimes too, I think, for even our generation, but definitely the generations below us to feel optimistic about just the direction of humanity and the world. So if it can just help a little bit, then I'm happy.
yay. Well, thank you. And I wanted to talk about one of my favorite books of yours, which is Practical Mediumship. And I recommend it all the time because it's such a great go to guide if you are curious about developing and you're not wanting to take classes or ready to take classes or not sure where to start, I think this is a great place to start. And it's almost like what I was looking for when I was opening up to spirit. I really wanted something like that, like an applicable, like Cliff Note type. Not that it's Cliff Notes, it's very in depth, but it outlines things where I could then take what I wanted and like, maneuver the way you want to, but you feel like you have this structure to work within. So it's called Practical Mediumship, and you can get it on Amazon. You can get all your books on Amazon, right? Or do you want them to go through your site? Do you have a preference?
Amazon is totally cool.
Okay, cool. And then now keep an eye out for his new book. And also, I noticed on your website that you're going to be offering classes online that are, how do you describe them? Like on demand.
Yeah, I want certain things live because I do want people who live in places where they can't access a metaphysical center or a Unitarian church or a spiritualist church to have interaction. But I also know that there are people who have busy lives and sometimes you just, I can do a half hour here and a half hour there. So I'm kind of figuring out the structure now of the balance of what's live versus what's on demand. But it seems to me that that's the next logical step as far as the teaching. Because like you'd mentioned, I stopped doing phone readings a couple of years ago and it's been very like in-person oriented, but so many people are like, I see you offer these classes, but I live in Iowa or whatever. So I want to be able to reach those people too.
great, and I love it because I love the way I've said this, like this is like the third time I'm mentioning it, but I love the practical way that you blend your modern mediumship with like the richness in the soil of the spiritualist perspective. So I'm so glad that you're doing this online, and I'm so glad that you teach. And so if you don't already follow his podcast and listen, go listen to all the backlog. You have so many episodes of so much, and I still have a favorite episode of yours, and I believe it's the sitting in the power episode. Is that right? I don't remember the exact title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
I
was,
yeah.
I like that one too. I'm sure you find it too with like the interviews and stuff. Like sometimes you just do it, and then there are other times where it feels like it was done, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. That was
Channeled or something. Yeah.
one of those episodes where it's like, I'm not planning on talking about this. I just had this itch one day. So I just hopped on and did it, and it was, it was good. I like that.
That's the best. And I love also the way you just kind of drop episodes when you have time in life, when you feel it. And that's kind of what this podcast also like when in my life I feel like I have the time and energy, that's when an episode will become. But it's staying on that's it's so hard to have such a regimented way. Um
Organicness out of it.
yes. Oh
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Cool. Well, that hour flew by. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for everything that you're doing for the mediumship community and all the wisdom that you bring. We appreciate it.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you for doing this.
All right. Take care.